War changes everything, even what we eat. Imagine being thousands of miles from home, hungry, exhausted, and the only thing standing between you and survival is a can of mystery meat, a chocolate bar so hard it could break your teeth, or a powdered breakfast that looked nothing like the food you grew up with. During World War II, American soldiers didn't just fight enemies, they fought their own rations. These meals were strange, shocking, and sometimes unforgettable. From Spam to sardines, from waxy chocolate to biscuits that could double as bricks, today we're reopening the mess kit and revisiting 25 of the most bizarre foods American soldiers had to survive on during the Second World War. Welcome to History Bites, where we rediscover the forgotten, the nostalgic, and the unbelievable stories of America's past. Let's dig in. It was salty, it was slimy, and it was everywhere. For many soldiers, Spam wasn't just food, it was a way of life. First introduced by Hormel Foods in 1937, Spam was cheap, portable, and had an almost magical shelf life. When America entered World War II, the military bought it in massive quantities. Cans of Spam were shipped across the Atlantic, the Pacific, and into nearly every Allied camp. Spam was convenient. It didn't need refrigeration, could be eaten straight from the can, fried in a pan, or mixed with rice, potatoes, or vegetables, if soldiers were lucky enough to have any. It was filling, high in calories, and reliable. So reliable that the US even sent it to Britain and the Soviet Union as part of wartime aid. But for those who ate it daily, Spam became the enemy within. Soldiers joked about having Spam for breakfast, Spam for lunch, and Spam for dinner. Some swore they would never touch it again after the war. It was the meal that symbolized both survival and monotony. Spam helped win the war, but it left generations of veterans with memories they couldn't forget or forgive. Some meals were disliked, but this one was despised. Sea rations often included canned ham mixed with lima beans. On paper, it sounded practical: protein from the ham, fiber from the beans. In reality, it was slimy, fatty, and barely edible. Soldiers dreaded opening the tin. The beans were mushy, the ham greasy, and together they formed a meal that was unappealing in taste and texture. It was supposed to be hearty. Instead, it became infamous. The hatred was so strong that troops gave it a vulgar nickname: Ham and Motherfasteriscasters. Shortened to Ham and Mofos, the name spread across the military. Veterans later recalled it as the single most hated ration of the entire war. It wasn't just disliked, it was traded, dumped, or buried. Too many soldiers, the thought of eating it was worse than going hungry. Breakfast is supposed to be comforting, a taste of home. But for soldiers overseas, breakfast often came in a powdered form. Real eggs couldn't survive the long journey, so the army turned to dehydrated egg powder. Just add water, stir, and cook. In theory, it was clever. In practice, it was depressing. The powder often clumped together, creating rubbery lumps that turned greenish if cooked poorly. Instead of the fluffy scrambled eggs soldiers longed for, they got chalky, metallic-tasting piles of yellow paste. The military shipped millions of pounds of these powdered eggs overseas. They were lightweight, easy to store, and packed with protein. For cooks serving thousands, it was a godsend. But for the men in the mess hall, it was a cruel imitation of home. Many veterans later admitted they couldn't touch powdered eggs again after the war. What should have been a comfort became a symbol of longing and disappointment. Chocolate is supposed to bring joy. During World War II, it brought frustration. Hershey was tasked with creating a chocolate bar that could withstand heat in the tropics without melting. The result was the tropical chocolate bar, a survival tool disguised as candy. It looked like chocolate, but the taste was another story. Soldiers described it as waxy, bitter, and almost inedible. Some compared it to soap, others to candle wax. It was dense, hard, and more suited for building a shelter than eating. The bar was high in calories and designed to last in the harshest conditions. Technically, it did its job, but it left soldiers with a bitter taste, literally. Many tossed it aside, traded it, or saved it as a backup emergency ration. Instead of boosting morale, it became a joke. The tropical chocolate bar proved that not even dessert was safe from the realities of war. They weren't just food, they were weapons. Hardtack biscuits had been around since the Civil War, simple crackers made of flour and water, baked until rock hard. And in World War II, they returned once again. Hardtack had one purpose: survival. It lasted forever. Soldiers could carry it for months without worrying about it spoiling. Drop it in soup or coffee, and it would soften enough to chew, at least sometimes. On their own, these biscuits were nearly impossible to bite. Many soldiers joked that hardtack could break a tooth or stop a bullet. Some used them as improvised tools like shims or even poker chips. In desperate times, it was food. In everyday rations, it was a punishment. Hardtack reminded soldiers of just how far from home they were. Even bread had turned to stone. Fruitcake is already divisive at Christmas, but in a war zone, it became infamous. The US military added a dense fruitcake to rations as a morale booster. The idea was simple: a dessert that lasted forever. And last forever it did. The C-ration fruitcake was so heavy and dense that soldiers joked it could survive the war better than they could. Some compared it to a brick, others to cement. It was sweet, but it was far from fresh. Still, in moments of homesickness, some soldiers appreciated it. For others, it was yet another item to trade, toss, or laugh about. What was meant to be comforting often ended up as comic relief. The fruitcake of World War II became a symbol of endurance, a dessert no one asked for, but everyone remembered. Mashed potatoes should be smooth, creamy, and comforting. But in the army mess hall, they often came from a bag of dehydrated flakes. Add water, stir, and you had instant potatoes. Except they didn't taste like potatoes. The rehydrated flakes turned into a gluey paste, with a bland flavor that felt more like wallpaper paste than food. Soldiers ate it because they had to, not because they wanted to. It was cheap, lightweight, and filled bellies. But to the men on the front lines, it was just another reminder of how far away real cooking was. Greasy, salty, and oddly textured corned beef hash was a staple of C-rations. It was filling, high in calories, and easy to heat. But the smell alone was enough to turn stomachs. Soldiers called it bully beef, a term borrowed from the British. The hash was a greasy mixture of meat and potatoes pressed into a tin. Some tolerated it, others despised it. Many joked it looked the same going in as it did coming out. It kept men alive, but at a price, refreshing in theory, disappointing in reality. Soldiers received packets of powdered lemonade to add to their canteens. It was supposed to give them a taste of home, plus some vitamin C. Instead, it often tasted sharp, chemical, and closer to battery acid than lemonade. Soldiers drank it to mask the taste of questionable water, but few enjoyed it in hot climates. Even bad lemonade was better than nothing, but no one mistook it for the real thing. Inside ration kits, soldiers sometimes found tiny tins of spread. Peanut butter was one option, cheese another. In some cases, the two were combined into a strange hybrid. The spreads were thick, sticky, and nearly impossible to spread on the rock-hard crackers they came with. Soldiers often joked you needed more water just to swallow them. Still, they were a change of pace, salty, filling, and high in calories. But no one ever confused them for real peanut butter or fresh cheese. Mac and cheese, the ultimate comfort food back home. On the battlefield, it became a pale imitation. The army issued powdered macaroni and cheese, which required water, heat, and a strong stomach. Instead of creamy pasta, soldiers got soggy noodles coated in watery, artificial sauce. It was edible, but far from comforting. Many soldiers missed the boxed craft dinners of home. The wartime version was a cruel reminder that even comfort food had been rationed away. Perhaps the most infamous C ration of all, the meat and vegetables stew. The label sounded promising, but the contents told a different story. Inside was a greyish stew with chunks of unidentifiable meat and limp vegetables. Soldiers nicknamed it Mystery Stew. Some said it looked like it had already been eaten once. It was filling, yes, but never satisfying. Many veterans later recalled that the only thing more mysterious than the stew's flavor was what the meat actually was. Imagine starting your day with scrambled eggs that never saw a chicken. That was the reality for thousands of soldiers who relied on powdered eggs. The military dehydrated real eggs into a yellow powder that could be rehydrated with water. It looked close enough to the real thing, But the taste? Often chalky, bitter, and almost chemical, still, eggs were seen as a powerhouse of protein, and the powdered form made them easy to transport without spoiling. For many guests, though, the smell alone could make them gag. It was a gamble each morning. Would this egg taste edible? Or would you be pushing it around your tin tray, wishing for home? And yet, soldiers ate them because they had no choice. It was either that or fight on an empty stomach. A hamburger in a can might sound like a clever idea today, but in World War II it was nothing short of a disaster. Canned cheeseburgers were introduced as a morale boost to bringing a slice of home to the battlefield. Unfortunately, once the can was opened, soldiers were greeted with soggy bread, rubbery meat, and melted cheese that tasted more like glue than dairy. While it represented a nostalgic attempt to bring Americana overseas, the execution failed. Many soldiers would trade or outright toss these burgers in a can. Still, they lay a fascinating reminder of how far the army went to try and comfort its troops, even if it left most of them shaking their heads in disappointment. Few foods are as tied to World War II as Spam. This canned meat became legendary, feeding not only American soldiers, but also allies across Europe and the Pacific. It was cheap, it was portable, and it could last forever on the shelf. But after weeks of Spam for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, soldiers grew tired of it, nicknaming it special army meat or something posing as meat. The texture was rubbery, the salt overwhelming. Yet Spam kept men alive when nothing else was available. For some veterans, just the sight of a blue Spam can decades later could trigger memories of foxholes, long marches, and homesickness. It was a blessing and a curse rolled into one salty tin. It was supposed to be hearty, warming, and filling, but military canned stews often turned into a greasy, flavorless sludge. Carrots dissolved into mush, potatoes soaked up all the salt, and the meat was chewy enough to break your jaw. For hungry soldiers, though, a hot stew meant warmth on a cold night in Europe or the Pacific. The idea was to simulate home cooking in a can, but the taste missed the mark. Still, when you're half frozen in a foxhole, even a bad stew was better than nothing. Soldiers learned to drown it in ketchup, hot sauce, or anything that masked the metallic aftertaste. Today, peanut butter is an American classic, but in WWII, it came in heavy tins that made soldiers groan before they even opened them. The texture was thick, oily, and often hard to spread. But peanut butter offered one of the highest energy boosts in the ration kit. Soldiers used it as fuel before long marches, or mixed it with crackers when nothing else was available. Though the packaging was clumsy, this sticky paste provided comfort and familiarity. A bite of peanut butter could bring back memories of childhood kitchens, even if the taste was far from perfect. Long before boxed mac and cheese became a pantry staple, the US military experimented with powdered cheese mixed with pasta. It was filling and quick, but the problem was taste. The cheese powder often clumped into sticky blobs, leaving half the noodles bare and half coated in orange paste. Soldiers called it cheese glue. Still, pasta provided carbs, cheese provided fat, and together they gave enough fuel to keep moving. It wasn't the mac and cheese of Mom's kitchen, but it was an early version of what would later become one of America's favorite comfort foods. Sometimes the sweetest memories came in the simplest form. Soldiers often received little tins of hard candy peppermints, lemon drops, or root beer flavors. These candies didn't spoil. They boosted morale, and they gave a quick burst of sugar when energy was running low. In the chaos of war, a single piece of candy could feel like gold. Soldiers traded them, saved them, or carried them as good luck charms. And for a brief moment, the taste of peppermint could transport a weary G back home to a movie theater or a Saturday night date. Hash was meant to be filling minced meat, potatoes, and seasoning all fried up together. But in reality, mystery meat hash became a soldier's nightmare. The meat was unrecognizable, the potatoes were mushy, and the smell alone made some gag. Soldiers joked that the mystery was whether it was beef, pork, or last week's Spam. Yet, hash was easy to make in bulk, and in desperate times, it provided badly needed calories. The joke became common in camps: you don't ask what's in the hash, you just eat it, pray, and move on. These weren't your modern buttery crackers. Army biscuits were so tough they could break teeth. Soldiers often had to soak them in coffee or soup just to make them chewable. That they were filling, lasted forever and fit neatly in ration packs. For some, the taste was so bland it felt like chewing cardboard. Yet, soldiers kept them in their pockets for long marches and firefights, snacking on something that felt more like survival than comfort. Fruitcakes might be a holiday tradition, but for soldiers, they were a battlefield burden, dense, sticky, and overly sweet. These bars were packed with raisins, nuts, and sugar to keep troops energized. The problem? Many soldiers despised them, calling them bricks in disguise. Still, they could last months in storage and provided much-needed calories. For homesick soldiers, even a terrible fruit cake was better than nothing, especially when shared with a buddy on Christmas Eve far from home. This was the Army's attempt at lemonade, a bright yellow powder that could be mixed with water if you were lucky enough to have clean water on hand. The drink was sour, chemical tasting, and barely refreshing, but it helped mask the flavor of questionable water. Soldiers often complained that it tasted like battery acid. Still, in the sweltering Pacific heat, even fake lemonade was welcome. Beans were a cheap protein source, so the Army used them everywhere. One of the stranger versions included vinegar seeds and beans. The tang was supposed to add flavor, but often it just made the dish sour and unpleasant. Soldiers either loved or hated them. Many joked that the beans were as explosive as the grenades once they kicked in later. Perhaps one of the strangest creations was the victory sausage. Meat was scarce, so sausages were bulked up with fillers like soy, breadcrumbs, or even potato starch. The result? Sausages that looked familiar but tasted nothing like home. Still, they symbolized sacrifice and ingenuity, stretching every ounce of meat to feed as many troops as possible. For many veterans, the memory of those sausages lingered for decades, not because they were delicious, but because they represented survival. And there you have it, 25 shocking meals that American soldiers ate during World War II. Some were edible, some were horrifying, and a few even became legends like Spam. But every one of them tells a story about survival, sacrifice, and the incredible endurance of a generation that fought through hunger, fear, and war. If you enjoyed this nostalgic journey into forgotten wartime foods, don't forget to like this video, share it with fellow history lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating dives into America's past. Until next time, this was the America we remember.